All right, so your quiz tomorrow is no calculator. So some of the numbers you might have seen on your review may be bigger than what you see on your quiz. So if you can do your review, I'm confident that your quiz will feel a little bit simpler for you for some of them. Okay, the main thing that you want to do when you're factoring are your 3 steps. So you're always looking for that GCF. You have to pull out what they have in common. You cannot leave those inside. And then you're going to look for your special patterns, so the difference of 2 squares. And then you can always guess and check with your FOIL. So I feel like we're really good at these when they start with a variable. When you start and you're guessing and checking, so you have the G and the G, you're looking for 2 values that multiply to a negative and add to a negative. If they multiply to a negative, we should be putting the opposite signs in there right away. Okay? And if you're really good at your multiplication facts, you don't necessarily have to do the entire t-chart. Do you guys know what to multiply to negative 72 but add to negative 6? 6 and 12, 6 times 12. Okay, so to get a negative 6, the 12 has to be negative. All right, and if you weren't sure about that, when you're doing your t-chart, what I recommend is you just go in order. So you know 1's going to go into 72. You know 2 is going to go in there because it's even, right? So you can cut that in half. And then you can just go down the list. 324, 4, and then you might have to like guess and check some of these using division, okay? But then you get to a point where, oh, it's 8 and 9, so you found all of them, you can go back down the list. Again, it doesn't matter if you have G plus 6 and G minus 12, or if you have G minus 12 and G plus 6. The important thing is the plus has to go with the 6, the minus has to go with the 12. So the 2 should add up to the middle. Okay, for B, there are 2 ways you can do this. So one way I showed you is you can factor out the negative. If you do that, your negative is going to stay on the outside. So feel free to put it on your line right away. And then you're looking for 2 values that multiply to 24 but add to negative 5. Okay, so we know that 8 times 3 is 24. So the 8 has to be negative, the 3 has to be positive. And you can write this as negative times x minus 8 times x plus 3. You could put the x plus 3 first. And then there are a couple of alternate answers. Because this is a negative, I don't require you to take that out. So if some of you factor with the negative in, you could have this as an answer, and that would be correct. Or you can have this as an answer. Okay, so any 3 of those would be full credit. Okay. Now C, they both have a y in common. When you take out what they have in common, remember, that sits on the outside and you're dividing. So y divided by y, that's going to be a negative 1. Now be careful, once you take out the common factor, you have to check for those special patterns, and both of these are perfect squares. So you're going to have y, and then it's 8y plus 1 times 8y minus 1. And then we should just be checking with FOIL. 8y minus 8y makes 0y. 8y times 8y is a 64y squared, and 1 times negative 1 is going to multiply to negative 1. Okay, for this one, the nice thing about 5 is it's prime. The only thing that multiplies to 5 is 5 and 1, so that helps you set up your 2 factors. And then for 36, it's 1 and 36. How many times does 2 go in there? 2 goes in there, 18, 3 goes in there, 12, 4 goes in there, 9, and then 6 and 6. So with these, you're going to have to plug them in and figure out what's going to make a positive 27. So if the last number is positive, the signs have to be the same, so they both have to be plus. Remember that whatever you put here is getting multiplied by the 5. So if you try the 3 and the 12, okay, you'll get 15t and 12t. That's what's going to add to the 27. So you have 5t plus 12 times t plus 3. Okay, and then for E, 121 and negative 36, those are both perfect squares. Whenever you have a binomial, check for the difference of squares. Okay, so that's going to be 11a plus 6 and 11a minus 6. You can do the square root of both, right? So then 66a minus 66a cancels. 11a times 11a, 121a squared. Positive times a negative is going to be a negative. Okay, so F was a little tricky because you do have to make sure that you're taking out the GCF. So some of you might have realized that you could take out 6 right away, but that is kind of a bigger number to do without your calculator. So instead, maybe what you would notice is that all those numbers, 6, 66, and 168, they're all what type of numbers? Even. So even if you didn't know the 6 right away, that's okay. If you take out the 2, half of 160 is 80, so this is going to be 84. Okay, you could take out the 2 first, and then you notice the 3 and the 33, the 3 goes into both. You guys can either divide, or do you know right away how you know 3 is going to go into 84? Yep, 8 plus 4 is 12, and it goes into 12, so it has to go into 84. Okay, so you can divide to get 28. So if you take the 3 out and there's a 2 already out there, you just multiply them together. So it's y squared minus 11y plus 28. Okay, so then this is 6, and now you can factor. So now you're looking for what multiplies to 28 but adds to 11. Do you see how that's easier than trying to do all the factors of 168? Yeah. Okay, so I want you to check your answers, because if you have something like, do some of you have 6y minus 42? Okay, so if you have 6y minus 42, 6 is going to go into both of those, and you have to take that out. Okay, so if you have 6y minus 42 times y minus 4, 6 can go into both, so you'll just factor that out, and then you'll end up with the correct values. Or do some of you have 6y minus 24 times y minus 7? Do some of you have that? Because if so, it'll be a similar case. You can take out the 6, and if you take out the 6, then you have the y minus 4 times the y minus 7. Okay, so make sure you're just checking for your GCF first. And then your GCF is going to go on the outside, and I did not write that correctly. So will you fix that for me? Okay, so you have the 6 times y minus 7 times y minus 4. Okay, and it has to go outside both sets of parentheses. Okay, now when I look at G, I'm like, okay, those are some really big numbers there, but I'm also going to notice that they're perfect squares. So if they're perfect squares, you might have a perfect square trinomial. So if you take the square root of 36b squared and you take the square root of 49, here you have a negative. You can just check to make sure it is going to add up to negative 84. So you have negative 42b and negative 42b. That is negative 84. So you can write your final answer is 6b minus 7 squared. And again, if you wrote 6b minus 7 times 6b minus 7, that is still correct. Okay? All right, now the next section I know was a little tricky, so let's talk about some things we can do with that. So whenever it says to solve by factoring, you have to make sure that you are factoring completely. Do you guys know what that means to factor something completely? Without telling me that you factor completely. You are going to get a solution here. And when you're factoring completely, that's just a reminder that if there's a GCF, you have to take that out. And if there's a special pattern, you have to make sure you factor it down to that special pattern. Okay, like the difference of squares. Okay, and then notice in the directions it says show all work for credit. Okay, that is not a threat, that is a reminder. Okay, so the show all work is just saying, hey, remember in class we talked about, you know, that zero product property where you have to set each one equal to 0. Okay, so that's just the reminder. So when you're finding the zeros, you just have to set this equal to 0. So instead of f of x, you can just write 0 equals 3x squared plus 15x. And then this is a binomial. Remember with binomials, you're either going to have a GCF or the difference of two squares. Okay, so the GCF in this case is going to be 3x. And when you take out 3x, you're dividing. 3x squared divided by 3x is x. 15x divided by 3x is... Yes, I will. Okay, bye. All right, and then here's the part that I want you to make sure that you do. So if you look back in your notes, you're going to see that you have 3x equals 0 or the x plus 5 equals 0. So the reason why we want to see this is because it's the zero product property. Okay, and so I need to see that step. And then if you want to write from there, x equals 0 or... Okay, I'm not going to be picky about showing like the minus 5. It's really the zero product property that I want to see. Okay. All right, and then I'm going to let you check your answers for these two. And if you didn't put your x equals, please don't stress out about that. If you have like -3 or -4, that's fine. Or if you put a comma between them, that's fine. All right, so if you got your answers right, when I'm going over this with you, I want you to just double check that you showed your work properly. So we have 3x squared plus 13x plus 4 equals 0. So everything goes on one side. And then you can start this by finding what's going to multiply to 3x squared. Anytime you have a positive, what does that tell you about these two signs? They're both the same. And then this is going to tell you whether they're both positive or whether they're both negative. Okay, so you should have 3x plus 1 and x plus 4. Again, you can check that with FOIL. Inside you have 1x, here you have 12x. If it adds up to the middle number, you know you did it right. Okay, and then I want you to just double check that you have this step where you set them equal to 0. Okay, and then for this step, if you can do x equals -1/3 from there, that's fine. Okay, if you're somebody that knows like, oh, it really helps me to write out that step, then please do it. Okay, I want you to do what works best for you. Okay, and if you're not writing it out, I just hope at least you're having some inner dialogue, like, okay, if it's x plus 4, I'm moving it over, that's your negative. Because those are just small things that can add up, okay, when you're taking your test, okay? All right, and then the last one, we are going to move over the 9. So when you're factoring, you always want the equation to be equal to what value? Yep, you always want it to be equal to 0. Okay, so that's a little different than some of the other ones we've done and the one that we're going to do in just a moment. So once you've done that, I want you to notice that you have perfect squares. You have the 36 and the 49. So I would try splitting it up into 6x and 6x, your 7 and 7, and then they both have to be plus. So this would be 42 plus 42, which is 84. You can also write it like this. Okay, so whichever one you use, you are going to use the zero product property. If you're solving this and you have to take the square root, okay, you need to show what you're doing from one step to the next. So if you're taking the square root of both sides, I just need to see that. If you set each one equal to 0, that's fine. Okay, and then divide by 6, and you'll get x equals negative 7 over 6. Okay, how are you feeling about the first page? Show me on your hands. Give me a 0 to 5. 5 being rocking.